Well, welcome everyone back to the Cocoa Futures three-part webinar series on innovation, impact, and indulgence in chocolate's next era, hosted by Branch Food in partnership with Business Location Switzerland. We're getting started a little bit late here, but thank you for bearing with us through these technical difficulties. So by way of introduction, my name is Lauren Abda. I'm the founder of Branch Food. We're a launchpad for food innovation and one of the largest networks of food industry stakeholders worldwide. At Branch Food, we connect every corner of the food ecosystem through events, consulting, and investing, and mostly the investments are in promising new startup ventures that are improving the sustainability of our food system. So you can learn more about our work at branchfood.com, branchventuregroup.com, or reach out to me directly at lauren@branchfood.com. I'm also thrilled to welcome and recognize our partners at Business Location Switzerland. BLS is a national initiative bringing together Switzerland Global Enterprise, the Swiss business hubs worldwide, and regional promotional agencies such as the Greater Zurich Area, Switzerland Innovation, Invest Western Switzerland, Basel Area Business and Innovation, St. Gallen Bodensee Area, and other cantonal and regional economic development organizations. Together, they help international companies explore and establish a presence in Switzerland by providing market insights, regulatory guidance, and introductions to universities, research institutes, and incubators, as well as industry networks. So if you're interested in learning more about how Switzerland can support your company's growth, please don't hesitate to connect with the BLS team. I'm also happy to introduce you to them. In the first session of our Cocoa Futures webinar series, we explored the technologies and innovations that are reimagining how chocolate is made, sourced, and experienced. In our second session, we took a critical look at the environmental and human costs behind one of the world's most beloved indulgences and how leading companies are working to mitigate them. If you didn't catch either of these sessions, you can find them both on the Branch Food YouTube page, and we will drop that link in the chat here over the course of this webinar. So today, in our third and final session, we will explore changing consumer preferences and the market for premium chocolate. And this session will really unpack how demographic shifts, global palates, and lifestyle-driven preferences are reshaping chocolate's positioning in the marketplace. And today, we're joined by our esteemed panelists to inform this topic and this discussion. So finally, with that, I'd like to introduce again our moderator for the series, Elizabeth Crawford, Senior Editor at Food Navigator USA. Elizabeth brings more than 2 decades of experience covering the food, supplement, and healthcare industries, reporting on everything from investment and innovation to ingredients, regulatory developments, labeling, and emerging trends. She's also the host of Food Navigator USA's Soup to Nuts podcast, a go-to resource for understanding what's next in food and beverage. So Elizabeth, we're thrilled to have you guide today's conversation with our expert panelists, and over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lauren, for bringing all of us together. I do want to echo what you said about this being a fantastic panel of 3 webinars. I've covered the food and beverage space for more than a decade and learned a lot in the last 2 sessions. So I would encourage everyone, if you haven't already, do catch those on demand because they are packed with insights about where this industry is going and how it got where it is today. And speaking of today, we're going to be focusing on premium, which, as we'll discuss, doesn't just mean higher quality or more expensive, although it can mean both. But it also reflects the identity, values, and experiences of the products and the companies that produce them, as well as the consumers that buy them. And I think this interaction between these 3 is really important, and we'll tease out more about it today as we go along. I think today's consumers, they want chocolate that delights their senses and aligns with their ethics, health goals, and worldview. So to unpack all of this and what it means for brands in terms of pricing and innovation, we do have 3 fantastic panelists with us. I would like to introduce Melissa Abbott, who's the Vice President, Syndicated Studies at the Hartman Group, who brings a deep insight into the shifting consumer motivations and perceptions around indulgence and premium. Dan Waters, CEO at Hue, a pioneer in redefining chocolate around simplicity, transparency, and wellness. And last but not least, Eric Garnier, the founder of Choba Choba, a farmer-owned Swiss chocolate brand working to merge ethics, quality, and shared values. Thank you all for joining me. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. I would like to encourage attendees to type into the Q&A box as you think of it, any questions that you have. I'll do my best to also keep my eye on the chat box, but I do know my limitations and it might be keeping track of just one box, but I'll do my best to weave those questions in as they pop up. Otherwise, I'll also save a few minutes at the end of the session to try and address any questions that you all might have. So, with that, let's start with, I was going to say the basics, but as I think we'll find out today, basic is not the right word to describe premium. So, let's start with the fundamentals, sort of including this evolving and expanding definition of premium. Melissa, I know that the Hartman Group has extensive consumer research on how shoppers across categories are defining premium in 2025. How do you see modern consumers thinking about premium, and how has that definition maybe evolved specifically for the chocolate space in recent years?
Yeah. Hi, Elizabeth. Great to see you. Premium has really evolved significantly over the past several decades. Just overall from elite and fancy, often imported, reserved for, special occasions. Then we kind of saw like this foodie revolution happening with the, Food Network and globalization, consumers experimenting and, more discovery. And then I think what's interesting about that is that that kind of leads us to where we are today, where we saw this broadening scope of quality cues where natural, fresh, and less processed were really becoming more important and key elements and attributes of premium. So today, what we're seeing is that there's this notion of more purposeful premium, premium for everyday occasions. So, we saw this shift happening during COVID where, now we're seeing more wellness, uh, really culturally becoming more central to the consumer's realm of importance. So now post-pandemic, there's inflationary pressures and forcing trade-offs, but we still see consumers wanting higher quality on everyday occasions. And today that, really plays a role in chocolate when we think about, where the ingredients come from, the sourcing, the production, the changing tastes that are less commoditized, right? While offering, more convenience and access, but still higher quality and less processed. So I think that's a pretty good sort of summary of what's happened within the realm of premium today.
If it's okay to say, one of my favorite trends to emerge out of the pandemic was this focus on wellness, and with it, this idea that we can have both emotional well being and physical well being. And that we'll talk more today about how chocolate plays into both of them. But I am curious, Melissa, building on sort of what you said, I'm curious what sort of attributes you might see that are really resonating with consumers in terms of this premium chocolate, this everyday indulgence, and then also how that might differ, if it does, by generation.
Right. Yeah. So when it comes to, chocolate in particular, candy and sweets, but more specifically chocolate, first and foremost, like taste is always going to be the primary, leader here. And then we're seeing that consumers are really looking for no artificials and less processed. And so, when things that are providing better nutrition, so yeah, it's got to start off with taste and cleaner ingredients, less processing. That's kind of, the realm here when it comes to the attributes that consumers are really seeking. But then also, what we're seeing is that this idea of, it's an elevated, food experience is something like, what is it? What's that cue that can help consumers identify that there's something unique or distinct about, that particular product that they might be, interested in and looking at? Chocolate is certainly something there that we're seeing more and more consumers, particularly younger generations, Gen Z, millennials, where they're looking to specific advantages for, from premium. And, of course there's taste, but health is, really the next thing in line there. So when we think about, what a Gen Z consumer, who's starting to have more disposable income to some extent for things like chocolate, maybe not for buying homes, but, for things like higher quality chocolate, they're also interested in things that, avoid harm to the environment or support small business. So it's not quite as important as no artificial ingredients and provides better nutrition, which is about 49% of consumers. we see that avoids harm to the environment. That's a little bit lower down the list, but it over indexes with Gen Z consumers. So that's really important to identify there too, and avoids unfair labor practices. So this notion of sustainability and premium are now becoming part of this everyday realm, especially when it comes to things like chocolate.
This is really helpful, and we'll tease out some of this intersection between sustainability and taste experience ethics as we go along. But I appreciate that overview, sort of how different consumer groups are thinking about this. And I want to see what this looks like in action, right, in the real world. And so, Dan, Hugh has really helped redefine premium indulgence and wellness with clean labels and a focus on minimal ingredients, transparent sourcing. How do you all think about premium and this emergence of everyday indulgence from a brand perspective? And how do you see that maybe differing across the competitive landscape?
Yeah, sure. First of all, thanks for having me. Good to see you all. Yeah, from I think let's start from a competitive landscape point of view, right? I think what we're seeing, and we're seeing broadly, also just across categories, not just chocolate, is particularly in sort of the economic situation we're seeing, and particularly in the U.S., we're seeing kind of what we're calling kind of this barbell effect of premium, right? So where premium, and in that case, like if you just define premium from a price standpoint, premium performing well, sort of the kind of lower cost items performing well, and kind of the mainstream brands having a harder time, right? Because I think it's a little bit harder for them to differentiate. So we're seeing that. We're seeing, and then so you take it to Hugh, right? And I like what you said earlier about premium not being price driven. It undoubtedly is, and it's easy to codify the market that way, and look at the data. So it tends to get kind of broken in these price breaks. But for Hugh and what we see, we were a brand that was started, originally it was started as a restaurant, and the chocolate grew out of the restaurant, right? Which was a concept of limited, very clean ingredients, very clear guardrails on what's in and what's not acceptable in the brand, and being able to create a chocolate that is able to deliver on a very simple process, right? Which is less is more and simple, right? And we say a lot, making simple chocolate is really hard, right? Using less ingredients is really hard because you have to, choose those ingredients very clearly. But what we see, coming out of that from a consumer perspective, and sort of tying it back to wellness, is that, and this everyday indulgence, is we're seeing a willingness when you're able to be very clear about what's in the product and why. And obviously you're able to deliver, good taste, but you see the consumers are willing to think about our chocolate beyond how they think about sort of, chocolate in their everyday life, right? I think there's a huge portion of the consumer set in our markets that often sees chocolate as that sort of, oh, I'll have a little bit of chocolate after dinner, right? And then you sort of get into these day parts of the indulgence after dinner. What we're seeing is fully a third of our chocolate is eaten at breakfast. And so what we're seeing is this growth in clean, this growth in clean ingredients, clean sourcing, and being able to tell that story really resonating resonating with chocolate all of a sudden, in certain cases being part of the wellness journey.
Thank you. I had this moment when you said that chocolate was for after dinner. I was like, oh my God, I can't even tell you how many days I eat truffles for breakfast with my
Yeah.
coffee. So I'm glad you added that in there. Um, Eric, you have also described Choba Choba as excellence in product and ethics. For those of on the call who might not be as familiar with your brand, can you give us sort of the top lines about what Choba Choba stands for, how you think about premium, and how this maybe extends both as product quality, but also as a philosophy for your company?
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for the invitation. Hi, everyone. So as you mentioned earlier, Choba Choba is a farmer-owned Swiss chocolate company that was born 10 years ago in the Peruvian Amazon. And put simply, I think our mission is really to reconnect chocolate professionals and chocolate lovers with cacao farmers and try to really gather this community around what I would describe as a common passion for exceptional quality on one side and positive impact on the other side. So ultimately, what we try to do is really rebuild the human link that is often lost and broken in our industry. And for us, obviously, as we are positioned, I would say on the ultra premium side of the premium chocolate category, premiumness goes far beyond the notions of luxury or exclusivity. I think we see that as a living balance of excellence on one side and experience on the other side. And when we talk about excellence, we talk about mastery at every step, from cacao farming, cacao beans to the final product. But it's not only excellence in the flavor profile of the beans or in the texture of the chocolate, but it must also be excellence in the ethics behind it. So how you do the things you do, how inclusive is your value chain, how fairly is the farmer paid, how responsibly the land is managed, and so on. Are you actually trying to do something that is regenerative versus an industry that is today mostly destructive? So that's what we define or understand, at least at Choba Choba, as excellence. And experience, obviously, it's the human dimension behind all this, beyond what you taste. It's about what you feel. It's about what you stand for. It's about knowing really who is behind the product. It's about sensing the connection and that interdependence that we really fully embrace between farmers, makers, and consumers. And it's being part of a community. I think we're not really selling chocolate. I think we're creating a movement and we are trying to champion that interdependence that I was mentioning between all players that is obviously required to deliver amazing product. And I think when these two dimensions are met, experience, excellence, technical, human, product purpose, then you really come with something that is truly unique, and the uniqueness makes you a premium, I would say. So the chocolate eventually becomes an expression of a place, an origin, community, a vision, and shared values between farmers and consumers, I would say.
You pack a lot in there, and I feel like we could spend an hour on a lot of those different attributes and still barely scratch the surface. For example, regenerative versus sustainable versus organic, right? But what you said at the end there was about this relationship with the consumer as well. So how are you, what are you hearing from consumers? And I know that you have both B2B and B2C. So what are you hearing in food service and what are you hearing at retail? How is this message resonating with them?
Well, I think we've learned that the best communication approach for, at least for our brand, is really twofold. On one side, there is a lot to do in terms of education. So we try to educate about chocolate as a product because even chocolate lovers know too little about what it takes to really produce healthy, tasty, regenerative chocolate products. I think we've been educated a lot on wine, we've been educated on specialty coffee, but specialty chocolate is something that is rather new as a category, and we need to educate a lot on that. So that's what we do. Let's call it like educational marketing or pedagogical marketing. And it's not only about the product itself and what it takes to produce a great chocolate or a great cocoa beans, but it's also education about the sustainability challenges of the industry, the responses that the industry brings to tackle these problems, what we try to achieve. So education. And then the second pillar, I would say, of our communication and marketing towards our clients, be it chocolate professionals or chocolate lovers, is really authenticity. Do what you say what you do, don't overpromise. certainly don't under deliver. And we see that Melissa said something about Gen Z, and I think we see that especially that generation, but more broadly, consumers today, they don't take brand promises at face value anymore, I believe. Gen Z has been growing up surrounded by marketing noise. I think they've developed somehow a strong radar for what is authentic and genuine. And I think the audience we talk to at Choba Choba, actually more than perfection, they want proof and intention. And I think this authentic and transparent approach to marketing and communication, this pedagogical approach to marketing is also very solid when it comes to our B2B audience, especially when we talk about prices and especially when we're fully transparent that our price is not, for example, the translation of market fluctuation, but really the reflection of the real cost that goes with regenerative farming practices, ensuring living incomes to the farmers, preserving forest and ecosystem, and obviously producing the best cacao ever, because Melissa said it, taste is, I mean, we're talking about chocolate, right? So you can't just talk about sustainability. No. So I think when you have nothing to hide and able to prove your claims, then you really, really build trust with your consumers. And to answer your questions, that's what we get back from the consumers when we have this approach to championing what we do and promoting our brand and our project.
Fantastic. Thank you. So I think now that we sort of have this high level view of what's happening with premium chocolate, what the competitive landscape looks like, what consumers are thinking, I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into one aspect of premium, which is this health, wellness, and indulgence, and this tension that maybe happens between something that's better for you physically and maybe feeds your soul or your heart, right, emotionally, but that these are still treats. And so, Melissa, maybe you can start us off on this part of the conversation. How do you see chocolate being both something that's better for you, but still a treat? And what does that look like in terms of other macro trends we're following, like plant-based or functional benefits or low and no sugar?
Yeah, it's certainly something that we're hearing from consumers, particularly from our syndicated health and wellness research from 2025, as well as our sustainability research, which is our newest data from Q3. There is this very significant and clear cues we're getting from consumers that they're like permissible indulgence is key to them. And that is very subjective, right? So you have one consumer who might be really, looking for a type of thing that is an everyday, permissible indulgence, and it might be an iconic experience. And this could be something from Cheetos to a certain kind of chocolate that you grew up with. And that can be a premium experience. So let's, make sure that that is feeding something, within their soul. But then you have this growing set of consumers that they are seeing this convergence between health and sustainability. And health is really the driver, though. I want to make that quite clear that health is the significant driver. But what health means as permissible indulgence can mean something a little bit different to each and every consumer. But as we already covered here, it's this idea, first is taste, but then it's this idea of less processed. So how that shows up for the consumer can be, a little bit different. For many, it can be real sugar or a real sweetener. That in and of itself can cue a healthier, less processed, more tastier product. So that can also be, just pure cane sugar, or it can be coconut sugar or date sugar. We saw consumers kind of gravitating towards some of the lower or sugar replacements like monk fruit and stevia in some of the chocolates in the past. That has not really trended very well. So we are seeing consumers say, like, when it comes to a chocolate eating occasion, whether it's in the morning or, your late night kind of thing, they want that experience. It's a very personal kind of experience when it comes to chocolate. So they are not willing to give up this notion of that indulgent but yet permissible experience. So they might be more willing, or they tend to be more willing to give up sugar on beverage occasions, right? So they're going to be more willing to have reduced sugar or sugar replacements there. So that's one significant area is within the sweetener realm. But then when it comes to things like plant-based, I mean, we're seeing, really wonderful things coming out where there's, oat milk-based chocolates and dark chocolates that, different kinds of like emulsifiers or a lack of emulsifiers that cue even more, uh, cleaner, if you will. But really what we're seeing is this notion of if, as long as the consumer can see like who made it, how it's made, what are the ingredients within it, and is it going to be that enjoyable taste experience? Because it has to come back to that taste and, convenience. They want to be able to uh, have something that they can, if they so choose, to afford it on a fairly, regular basis. So those tend to be the most significant aspects.
This is really helpful to hear. I especially appreciate your insights around sweeteners because this has been a place that's been fast moving with a lot of trends moving up and down over the years. And Dan, I know that this is something that Hugh also thinks about, right? You have a special selection of sugar. So tell me a little bit about how Hugh is thinking about sugar, sweeteners, which one you picked and why, and how that fits into this broader clean label value set.
Sure. Yeah, we have always used unrefined coconut sugar, right? And the reasoning for that, I mean, there's a whole body of work around the potential benefits of coconut sugar, whether it's glycemic index or inulin or the sort of richness of nutrients. But what we have found is sort of sort of beyond that is, and Melissa had mentioned this, is it's the unrefined nature that's really important, right? And I think the concept of we try to touch the ingredients as little as we can in order to get them into a chocolate bar, right? So how do we process it, not just the chocolate, but how do we process all of our ingredients as limited as we can, to be able to, to achieve again. And I mean, Eric made the point and Melissa made it as well, is taste, right? You can, as a believer, you can get anybody to buy it once, right? To be able to have, we've got almost an 80% consumer repeat rate because it lives up to what we say. And I think we have stuck with coconut sugar. There's obviously a tremendous amount of other options that sort of fall into that place, whether it's raw cane sugar or date sweetener. I think those have all been very powerful for consumers as well. I think things that they can connect, if you can connect the item to something about in nature, it seems to connect very well, with consumers. And we have intentionally stayed away from what I would say are trends around whether it's sweeteners, whether obviously not artificial but even natural, just because to your point, Elizabeth, we've seen that rise and that fall. And what we've found is you just can't, it's hard to deliver the right performance for consumers, but it's also just one more piece of one more refined item in the list. So we've been very steadfast on unrefined coconut sugar, and I'm sure Eric would agree on this. Is it's really hard to sit on these stands of the ingredients, right? Because it's hard to find fair trade unrefined coconut sugar. That sort of that funnel gets pretty small, right? And so and then it becomes this question of having to stick to what we really believe in, right? And that's why we have very clear ingredient guardrails. But coconut sugar has been was used in the restaurant, and we've used it ever since.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful to hear how some of these trends again are playing out in the real world. Um, all of you have mentioned flavor, and I'm hoping that Eric, you can talk to us a little bit more about this? I think you said something that was really interesting, which is that you're not really making chocolate, you're making this movement, and that you're connecting the cacao side of the world with the chocolate side. And that division really struck me. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about what you're hearing from consumers or how you all are thinking about sort of that flavor and that sensory trends around premium when you really bring it down to the bean. And then, not to make things too complicated, we do have a question from the audience that maybe you can address as well, which is what strain of cacao is Choba Choba growing in Peru?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So I think I focus on our audience of chocolate professionals to answer your question. I think chocolate professionals today, they're really explorers. I think they want chocolates and cocoa products that tell stories about people of origin and soil and fermentation and even genetics. And we really see that there is a growing curiosity among chefs and chocolate professionals for what we could describe as traceable flavor, which is basically understanding how the interaction between terroir and genetics and post-harvest protocols can translate into different taste and different sensory profile. So in that sense, one thing that is interesting is that we have many chocolate makers that come to us and are trying to go into customization. Like they want to have their signature couverture, to speak this way. They want to be co-creators of their own chocolate recipe, which is something that is complex and it takes time and so on. But I think that's something that shows now that chocolate professionals, they don't want just to buy or use a semi-finished products, in that case, couverture chocolate, but they really want to be connected to the origin and connected to the whole craftsmanship from the farms to their creation. I think there are two trends that we see also from our side, plant-based alternatives to milk chocolate. We developed, it took us 18 months actually to develop that, but we developed a plant-based alternative to milk chocolate with a 45% chocolate couverture, where oat flour replaces milk powder. We have great feedback from our clients on that product. So that's on one side. And another trend also that we see is that there is an increasing demand from chocolate professionals, but I think also from consumers alike, for pure raw material, like beets, cocoa beans or cocoa nibs or 100% cocoa mass. So we see that they want to work more and more with the least transformed and processed product, and they want to have the hand on the raw material. So that's very interesting, especially, for example, ice cream makers. They're very fond of this 100% pure cacao mass that we recently launched. So these are a few trends that we can see in at least on the chocolate professional side of things. To comment on the questions from the audience, in Choba Choba we have 108 hectares, around 4 communities in the Guayabamba Valley. A big majority of the plantations are planted with a CCN51, which is an Ecuadorian clone that has quite a bad reputation on the market for good and for bad reasons. We won't have the time to go into this. I would be happy to connect with anyone who wants to talk about the project, the question deeply. What we have mastered for the past 10 years is the post-harvest processes that allows us to really take the best out of these varieties. And then we have a vast diversity of different cocoa varieties. And we have engaged 7 years ago in an amazing project involving scientists, researchers, to preserve and study this local genetic diversity. So we have a conservation garden. We have 89 different genotypes. We're working on evaluation of these genotypes for disease resistance, for productivity, for flavor analysis. And the next step of the project is to go for what we call bioprospections, which are basically missions in the conservation area in primary forest around our farms to identify wild cacao of the Guayabamba and keep going with that work. So it's a very long-term project, but the objective is to slowly but surely identified and propagates the best varieties. And when I talk about best varieties, I mean from a productivity perspective, from an agronomic perspective, and obviously also from a taste perspective. And this, connecting to the market, is something that is of high interest for the chocolate makers, because as I told you, they want to be part of this. So it's always wonderful when we invite clients on the ground to share what we do, to show what we do, and to have them engage with us on this long-term journey.
Thank you. Thank you for going a little deeper there on that. I think that's really helpful to have that extra context. And again, I wish we had more time to talk sort of the food science side of this and the agronomic side of this. But I do have, before we move on from this health and wellness part of our conversation, I think it's really hard to talk about sweets and snacks right now without talking about the impact of GLP-1 drugs. And so I'm curious, and this one's just open to anyone who feels like they can tackle it, right? But to what extent has this buzz and fervor around weight loss drugs impacted how consumers are thinking about indulgence in chocolate and portion size in this category?
I can jump in here as we're talking to consumers, on a quarterly basis for our syndicated research, really hearing how GLP-1s is the biggest change in how we can even imagine over the next 10 years. What will it be like for consumers when it comes to eating occasions and ingredients and GLP-1, the various formats that it's coming out in, and just the accessibility, which is great for a lot of consumers who really will benefit from these drugs. That being said, it's changing the way their profile, the taste profiles, and their satiety levels are. The very interesting thing that we're finding too is that it's changing the types of foods that consumers want to eat. So a lot of the traditional iconic foods that we all may have grown up on, that we would consider junk or ultra processed, not as appealing, right? Or smaller portions of it. But that said, we're also seeing that there is a desire for cleaner, more less processed, right? Ingredients, but consumers on GLP-1 still want to have their treats, just smaller portions of it. So what can we expect from this ongoing trend? I love the example of like the whole cacao that Eric was talking about for Choba Choba for the chefs, but we're also seeing like, chocolate covered cacao beans showing up as ways for consumers to have, because they're looking for fiber as well. So there are other ingredients beyond just the chocolate that can come in other formats too. And so chocolate covered nuts and things like that. So there's a lot of things that, Dan they're doing over there, where there's other formats that can be quite appealing to consumers who are taking GLP-1 drugs. And even then when they eventually get off of them, there is the notion that there will be a new way of eating. So they're going to, get used to these cleaner tasting treats, new formats, right? Maybe smaller portion sizes, but it doesn't mean that they are going to want it to be cheaper, right? And by cheaper, I mean lower quality. So that's the interesting thing that we're seeing coming out of GLP-1. A lot of interest in less processed, more real, new formats. I don't want to just say smaller, but I want to emphasize the idea of new formats, novel formats too.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, and it's obviously still relatively speaking early days. So we're seeing, we're learning, Melissa, you're certainly learning at a faster rate than we are through the marketplace. But I think, to that point, it's this concept of, if I'm going to eat less, what I eat, I want it to be better and better for me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just, I can, I'm eating less so I can afford it, but it's there's just a much more mindful approach to being able to, thinking of how people eat. And I think one of the things, back to, to the point around formats, it's different formats. Also, one of the things that's very nice about, tableted chocolate bars is, you can open them eat two pieces of the tablet and eat more the next day, right? It's not I have to eat it all in one place. So I think we feel we feel confident that that in being very clear in the sort of better for you and health and wellness space is going to be a benefit, even in the face of what is going to be a certainly a tectonic consumer change.
I appreciate that you think somebody can open a tablet and just eat part of it, but let's go with that. Let's go with that. Thank you both for chiming in sort of on the impact of GLP-1. I think the other thing, when we talk about cocoa, chocolate, and premium, right, is price, right? This has been in the headlines for a really long time. Everybody, even my mom, knows about how expensive chocolate is. Um, but Eric, you mentioned earlier that this price doesn't even really reflect the true price. And so I want to talk with you a little bit about how you are thinking about pricing and market fluctuations, what you're hearing from folks who are buying from you. And how do you help folks understand what the real price is?
I think education again is key, and I mentioned education and transparency. I think that guides us in everything we do. We've built transparency in our price story, I would say, or pricing policy. And as always, because Choba Choba is a farmer-centered ecosystem, our starting point is the farm, the farmers, and the beans. So the farm gate price, which is the price that is paid to the farmers, is the starting point of our cost plus pricing approach. So our cacao price is based on a living income benchmark, calculation of production cost, real productivity calculations, incentives to reward quality and agroecological practices. And that's the starting point we eventually build our retail price on. So we share that openly with our clients, with our distributors, with professionals, and they know exactly what is the price that is paid to farmers, that is paid to the cooperative, the prices that are the premiums that we pay to finance different projects on the ground. So I think when people understand the logic and they see that we are working with them on an open book basis, they support it. But it obviously needs to be authentic, it needs to be transparent, and it needs to be backed with numbers and facts. I very often hear brands talking about they pay the best price to the farmers, they pay the fair price to the farmers. If you go to these brands and you ask for their purchasing contract, they will decline the request. And why is that so? If you say it's fair, there is absolutely nothing to hide. So maybe it's not that fair. That's what I want to highlight here. But yeah, I think again, transparency and education explain the true cost of sustainability, the true cost of quality, and I think people understand, and actually our audience understands that. I think it's also about who are you talking to, who are you trying to convince with your brand, with your project. I mean, we're selling chocolate bars at for $10, so we're talking to people that really want to know what's behind these $10, that really wants to know what's behind the product and so on, and they want to be educated about it. So I think this works pretty well because, again, we're authentic, we're transparent, and we do what we say and say what we do.
Thank you. And Dan, I know that Hue is also priced at the higher end as a premium product. How are you navigating this roller coaster of cacao and cocoa costs? And how do you maintain your premium positioning while also communicating value, which might be more than price to consumers? Uh-oh, I think you're
I
muted.
got you. Eventually, I knew I would do that. No, I mean, I think it is an by far the most challenging market I've ever been a part of, because we're not talking about 10 to 15% increases in cocoa prices, right? So we have been very steadfast in in minimizing whatever sort of price impact we've had to our consumers and to our clients. I think, as we have navigated that, right, there is sort of two things, and it's going to sound, it's very similar because I think it rings very true to what Eric said is education is number one for anybody who has not seen how cocoa is grown around the world, right? If you come from sort of like, let's say you come from the heartland of America and you see corn being grown in big rows and very efficiently and effectively, that is not how it is grown, right? It is a very complicated, very disaggregated system, particularly where where we source from in West Africa. So helping consumers understand the complexity of it and why cocoa costs, but it's also being able to talk about then what we do, because that's part of the equation. But how you process, right? We could certainly process differently, add different sugar, and and walk away from various pieces of the brand promise, and knock a dollar off our bars, right? But then we have really nothing of what we stand for. And so we've done a lot of work on sort of navigating and holding price. The other piece that we've done is spending time trying to make sure that we have a set of offering in terms of formats that are accessible across price points, right? Not everybody wants a 60-gram bar. So we have a 30-gram bar. We just launched individual bites, launched packages of bites as well. So individual portions. So, so being able to still allow accessibility, but maybe not at that full price point has been really, really important for us as we started to, scale significantly.
I like this idea of your bites and maybe how they can do double duty as also maybe a breakfast bite.
Sure.
But we'll leave that. I want to talk a little bit about how we can talk about pricing from a business perspective, and that's very valid, right? But ultimately, it comes down to the consumer and what they're willing to spend. And so, Melissa, this is where I think, the Hartman Group really shines. What are you seeing in terms of the data about how consumers, to the extent that consumers will rationalize higher prices, and what factors they're considering on that front?
So this is a timely question too. I'd love to touch on two aspects of it. So first of all, there's like the sustainability claims. So we know that this is fresh data too. 60% of consumers agree that they look for a third-party certification to verify a company's claims. So increasingly, we're seeing millennials followed by Gen Z stand out as the most certification aware. So they're even recognizing lesser known labels. So we were talking earlier about how consumers, they don't want to see just marketing speak. They're becoming increasingly aware, especially because of all social media and TikTok, of performative language. So being able to have your verification backed up, right? So first thing, like USDA organic, 76% of consumers that we surveyed knew about it. That was up 9 points from 2 years ago. So that's like the greens fees in many instances. But that we found that 68% were more likely made it more likely to buy it when they saw that seal, that certification on a package. So getting into the more nuanced certifications, things like Rainforest Alliance certified, 36% of consumers are aware of it, over-indexing with millennials, but 71% who are aware of it makes them more likely to purchase it. So that's, just kind of really pinpointing here about even things like regenerative organic certification like ROC, or one of the many regenerative certifications we're seeing now. Again, over-indexing with the younger consumers for awareness. Of course, awareness is still quite low. The consumer knowledge around regenerative is really quite low, even amongst the more engaged consumers. However, 70 makes them, when they see that 30% see that on there, especially with the younger consumers, it makes them 71% more likely to purchase the product. So it's providing receipts for these consumers, the proof points essentially that it's worth the price point. So they're willing to pay that extra when they know that it's not just marketing speak, it's not just performative language. And what we also found, really, I just want to tack this on too, is, where are consumers doing their shopping these days? And when we surveyed consumers about, their last 30-day, where they were doing their grocery shopping, we found that there are shopping more stores per average. So back in like pre-pandemic, it was 4.9 stores in the past 30 days of channels. And fast forward today, it's about 6 stores on average. So it's increasing, but where is that increase happening is even more interesting, because we're seeing that younger shoppers, they are going more to mass for their primary store. They're able to get better deals on a lot of these things. So, we're seeing that not just mass being, growing, grocery is the one that's shrinking. Even though consumers continue to still go there, they're adding more stores to their shopping repertoire. And what I find most interesting too is that, of course, yeah, there's specialty natural is growing for sure. But online has grown 26 points in since 2017. Of course, the pandemic plays a huge role in that, but it has created a behavior pattern for consumers. So yeah, we see that mass is growing, particularly for younger consumers, grocery shrinking, although they're still going there. Things like convenience is growing, again, online and direct to consumer. And specialty natural is still growing as well as discount. So places like Winco and grocery outlet. So gosh, you can find really high quality. This is what we hear from consumers, that so many consumers have their chocolate stash drawer. And when we go and we interview them in their homes, and you find the little secret, they might be real clean eaters, but you're going to find some, good high quality chocolate they're keeping away from their husband and their kids, for example. Um, but yeah, so we're seeing that discount is a place that they're doing this theatrics of thrift. So they might be, going to mass and doing all these other things, but they're going to find really cool brands at a discount store and buy, a significant amount of them to kind of stock up, if you will. So interesting things happening within the shopping realm too.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing sort of how the consumers are thinking about price, but also channel, and also certifications, and what makes it quote unquote worth it for these premium experiences. There are so many good questions in the Q&A, and I have more questions, and I'm really sorry that we are not at the hour, so we don't have time to talk about them in today's session. But I do want to thank all of our panelists for joining us, sharing your insights with us, and of course, our attendees for coming back for this third session. And with that, Lauren, I will hand the microphone back to you.
Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for moderating today's session, and to our expert panelists, Melissa, Dan, and Eric, for sharing your time, your insights, and your expertise. You were all fantastic. And we're very grateful to our partners at Business Location Switzerland for their collaboration and support in making the series possible. So thank you all. As I said earlier, today's conversation, marks the conclusion of our Cocoa Futures webinar series, where together we've explored the forces shaping chocolate's next era, from sustainability and sourcing to breakthrough technologies, innovation, and evolving consumer preferences. So it's been inspiring to hear from so many leaders within this industry, helping to define what's next. And we look forward to staying in touch with all of you. So on behalf of Branch Food and Business Location Switzerland, thank you for joining us throughout this series, for your thoughtful questions, and for being part of this global community, working to build a more resilient and sustainable future for cocoa and chocolate. If you'd like to continue the conversation, learn more about Branch Food's work with innovators and investors across the food industry by emailing me, lauren@branchfood.com, or explore how Business Location Switzerland can support your company's international growth. And we'd love to connect you with that team as well. So with that, thank you again for being part of this series. Check out all of the recordings on our YouTube page, and we look forward to staying connected and continuing to advance innovation in this space, looking to the future. So appreciate you all, and have a great day.